My name is Nadia Calloway. I am 26 years old. For my entire life, my family called me the broken one. The one who couldn't focus. The one who daydreamed in class, failed tests, forgot appointments, and lost track of conversations mid-sentence. While my brother Ethan collected awards, scholarships, and praise at every family dinner, I collected disappointed silences and second-hand pity. They said I had potential. What they meant was, I wasn't living up to it. They said they loved me. What they meant was, they wished I were different. And for 26 years, I believed every single word. But 3 weeks ago, on the day my family publicly announced that Ethan would inherit everything our grandfather ever built, a publishing empire worth $74 million, a woman I had never met walked up to me at the announcement dinner and handed me a letter. Inside that letter was the truth my grandfather had been protecting for 11 years. And inside that truth was the reason my family had spent my entire life making sure I never found out who I really was. This is that story. My grandfather, Douglas Calloway, built Calloway Press from a single print shop in Louisville, Kentucky in 1971. By the time I was born, it had grown into one of the most respected mid-size publishing houses in the country. 47 employees. A catalog of over 900 titles. Authors who had won national awards. Distribution in 12 countries. Grandpa Douglas was not a flashy man. He drove the same pickup truck for 19 years. He wore the same brown cardigan every Sunday. He ate the same breakfast, 2 eggs, wheat toast, black coffee, every morning of his adult life. But when he sat down with a manuscript, something changed in him. His eyes went sharp. His hands went still. He read like he was listening for a heartbeat. He used to say, publishing isn't about books. It's about giving a voice to people who have something worth saying but no way to say it loud enough. I was 9 the first time he let me sit beside him while he worked. He was reading a submission from a debut author, a woman from rural Alabama who had written a memoir about surviving something terrible. He read slowly. When he finished, he set it down, rubbed his eyes, and said, "This one." I asked him how he knew. He looked at me and said, "Because she told the truth, Nadia. And truth always sounds different from everything else. You can feel it." I didn't understand what he meant then. I would. My diagnosis came when I was 11. ADHD, combined presentation. The kind that makes you restless and scattered and slow to process written information all at the same time. The school recommended medication. My parents, Richard and Sandra Calloway, agreed. But their agreement was not the kind that came with support. It came with a shift. A subtle but permanent recalibration of what they expected from me. Before the diagnosis, I was a child who needed more patience. After the diagnosis, I was a child who had a ceiling. Richard never said it directly. He was too careful for that. But I watched the way he talked about my future differently than he talked about Ethan's. Ethan was going to study business at Vanderbilt. Ethan was going to work with Grandpa. Ethan was going to run Calloway Press someday. And Nadia, Richard would pause, clear his throat, Nadia will find something that suits her. Something that suits her. I was 12 years old the first time I understood that my father had already decided I was not worth the investment. Christmas 2014. The whole family at my grandparents' house in Louisville. The dining room smelled like pine and pot roast. Grandma Helen's good china on the table. The crystal glasses Grandpa only took out twice a year. Ethan had just won a regional debate competition. My aunt had framed the certificate and brought it as a gift. My uncle had driven 4 hours to celebrate. My father stood at the head of the table, hand raised like he was delivering a verdict. Ethan represents everything this family stands for. Discipline. Focus. Ambition. He will carry the Calloway name somewhere remarkable. Applause. Someone made a toast. Grandma smiled the way she did when she was proud but trying not to show too much. Then my father glanced down the table at me. And Nadia, he paused, is also doing her best. Nobody laughed. It was worse than laughing. They nodded. sympathetically. Like I was something fragile that needed to be handled carefully. Under the table, a hand found mine. Grandpa Douglas. Sitting 2 seats away, his weathered hand reaching across the space between us, squeezing once, firmly, without looking up from his plate. He didn't say anything. He didn't defend me out loud. But that grip said something my father's words never did. You are not what they just described. I held on to that feeling for a long time. It had to last me through a lot. After high school, a school I graduated from with a 2.8 GPA and 0 college acceptance letters from the schools my family had expected, I spent 2 years doing what they called figuring herself out. What I was actually doing was reading. Not textbooks. Not self-help. Not the kind of reading that looked productive. I was reading manuscripts. I had started volunteering at a small literary nonprofit that ran a writing program for incarcerated women. They needed someone to read submission drafts, give feedback, organize workshops. They were underfunded and understaffed and desperate. I had nothing else doing. I walked in on a Tuesday afternoon in February. I walked out 4 hours later with a stack of manuscripts and something I had not felt in years. Purpose. I could not have told you why reading those pages felt so different from reading anything in school. But when I picked up a raw, unpolished, honest piece of writing, something in my brain settled. The restlessness went quiet. The scatter disappeared. I read for 6 hours at a time without looking up. When I gave feedback, the women listened. When I suggested revisions, the pages got better. When I sat in the workshop circle and asked what is this story really about, underneath all these words, the answers that came back were extraordinary. I kept volunteering. Month after month. Year after year. I was not getting paid. I was living in a studio apartment with walls so thin I could hear my neighbor's alarm clock. I picked up waitressing shifts on weekends. I ate a lot of rice. But every Tuesday, every Thursday, every Saturday workshop session, I showed up. Grandpa Douglas found out through my grandmother. He called me one Sunday afternoon in October. He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't ask about money or plans or what my long-term career trajectory looked like. He asked, "What are you reading?" I told him about the women. About the manuscripts. About the Wednesday when a woman named Denise had read aloud a paragraph she had written about her daughter, and half the room had quietly started crying, including me. Grandpa was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "Come to Louisville next weekend. I want to show you something." I drove 6 hours in a car with a check engine light that had been on for 3 months. He took me to the original Callaway Press building. The one he had started in. It had been turned into an archive room by then, no longer used for editorial work, just boxes and old equipment and 50 years of history in labeled folders. He sat me down at a long table and started pulling things out. Original reader reports from the 1970s. Rejection letters he had written. Acceptance letters. Notes from authors, some of them now well known, thanking him for believing in their work when no one else would. He spread it all out in front of me. "This is what publishing actually is," he said. "Not the spreadsheets. Not the board meetings. Not the acquisition budgets." He picked up a yellowed handwritten letter and slid it toward me. "This is a letter from a woman named Clara Briggs. She sent me her manuscript 11 times over 6 years. 11 times. I rejected it the first 10. He paused. On the 11th submission, she had changed one thing. Not the plot. Not the writing. She had changed the perspective. She told the same story from a different angle. And suddenly I could feel her in it. He looked at me. "Do you know what that skill is called? Knowing where the truth is hiding in someone else's work?" I shook my head. "It doesn't have a name, Nadia. That's how rare it is." He told me that day that he had been watching me. That he had called the director of the nonprofit. That he had read some of the feedback letters I had written to the women in the program. He said, "You have the eye. Your father doesn't. Ethan doesn't. They are both good at running a business. But neither of them knows how to find a voice buried in a rough draft. I didn't fully understand what he was telling me. He handed me a small envelope before I left. "Do not open this yet," he said. "You'll know when it's time." I tucked it into my glove compartment and drove 6 hours home with the check engine light still on. 3 years passed. Grandpa's health declined slowly, then quickly. Pancreatic cancer. Diagnosed in March. Gone by September. I was at the hospital every week. I drove Louisville back and forth 11 times in 6 months. I sat with him while he slept. I read to him from manuscripts I was working on. I had by then moved into a part-time acquisitions reader role at a small independent press in Nashville. Not Callaway. Somewhere smaller. Somewhere I had earned my position one submission at a time. On one of his last clear days, he held my hand and said, "I settled everything. You won't have to fight. But you'll have to show up." I asked what he meant. He smiled. He said, "You always have to show up. That's the whole job." He died 11 days later. The estate proceedings were handled by his lawyer, a quiet man named Arthur Gaines who wore bow ties and spoke in complete paragraphs. My father assumed control of the meeting. He had already been co-managing Callaway Press for 5 years. He had been preparing Ethan for a leadership role. The succession plan, as he told the family, was settled. I was not consulted. I was not informed. I was given a date for the reading of the will and told to show up if I wanted to. I showed up. The will my father had been expecting left the business in trust, managed by the board, with Ethan named as incoming CEO and Richard maintaining oversight. That was the 2018 will. What Arthur Gaines read aloud that afternoon was something different. He cleared his throat, adjusted his bow tie, and said, "Douglas Callaway executed a codicil in November 2021. My father's expression didn't change. But his jaw tightened by exactly 1 degree. The codicil amended the distribution of Douglas Callaway's controlling shares in Callaway Press. 49% to a board-managed trust. 49% to Ethan Callaway. 2% to the board's discretionary reserve. And an editorial advisory seat, permanent, non-dilutable, with veto rights over all acquisitions, to Nadia Callaway." My father said, "That's not possible." Arthur Gaines looked at him over his reading glasses and said, "I assure you it is, Richard." The room was completely still. Ethan stared at the table. My mother's hand went to her mouth. And I sat there in a chair in the corner of a conference room in Louisville, Kentucky, holding the arms of my seat, thinking about the envelope still sitting in my glove compartment. That night, I opened it. Inside was a single piece of paper in Grandpa's handwriting. "Nadia. If you're reading this, then Arthur has done his job and the family has finally heard what I've been trying to say for years. You have the rarest skill in publishing. You know where the truth is hiding. I tried to build Callaway Press on that skill. I need you to protect it. Ethan will run the business. He is good at that. But without someone who can read, who truly read, the business becomes a machine. Don't let it become a machine. The advisory seat gives you veto rights over every acquisition. That means no book goes into this catalog that you don't believe in. That is the power I am leaving you. Use it the way you use everything else, quietly, carefully, and with your whole heart. I built this on finding voices no one else was willing to find. Now that is your job. Your grandfather. Douglas Callaway." I folded the letter. I sat in the parking lot of the hotel where I was staying and I cried for a long time. Not from grief, though there was grief. But from something harder to name. He had seen me. For years, in a house full of people who looked straight through me, one person had been paying attention. He had not told me while he was alive because he was protecting the plan. Because he knew my father would find a way to dismantle it if he knew too soon. He had trusted me to show up. So I showed up. The family dinner announcing Ethan's succession happened 3 weeks after the reading of the will. My father had not told Ethan about the codicil. He had not told my mother. He had consulted a lawyer, concluded that the advisory seat was binding but limited, and decided that the announcement could proceed as planned. What he did not account for was Arthur Gaines, who had sent a letter to every board member the week before the dinner. outlining, in precise legal language, exactly what my advisory seat meant. I did not know Arthur had done this until a woman approached me at the dinner. 60 years old. Silver hair. Impeccable posture. She had the particular stillness of someone who spent her life reading rooms. She said, "Miss Calloway. My name is Patricia Hale. I'm the board's longest-serving independent director. I knew your grandfather for 30 years. She handed me a letter. Your grandfather asked me to give this to you on the night your family announced Ethan's succession. He said," she paused, almost smiled, he said, "Nadia will need to know she's not alone in the room." I opened the letter. It was a list. 12 names. Every board member. Next to each name, one of two notations. He trusted them. He didn't. Next to Patricia Hale's name, "She'll go first. Follow her lead." I looked up at Patricia. She said, "You have 7 votes on the board if you need them." I said, "Why would I need 7 votes?" She said, "Because your father is about to stand up in front of 200 people and announce a succession that legally requires your sign-off on every acquisition going forward. And he hasn't asked for it." I looked across the room at my father. Standing near the podium. Confident. In control. I looked at Ethan. Straightening his jacket. Rehearsing his speech. I looked at the letter in my hand. I said, "What would my grandfather want me to do?" Patricia said, "He'd want you to do it right. Not loud. Not angry. Right." My father's speech was exactly what I expected. Ethan is the culmination of everything this family has built. His education, his discipline, his vision. Douglas would be proud. He didn't say my name. Not once. When he finished, the applause started. And then Patricia Hale stood up. She was not loud. She did not raise her voice. She simply stood and waited until the applause died. "Richard," she said, "I want to congratulate Ethan. Genuinely. But before we formalize anything tonight, I need to make sure the board is aligned on one structural matter." My father's smile stayed fixed. "What's that?" Under Douglas Calloway's amended will, all acquisitions require advisory approval from Nadia Calloway. That seat is non-dilutable and carries veto rights. Has Nadia been briefed on her role in the succession? 200 heads turned toward me. I stood. I had not planned what I was going to say. I had not rehearsed anything. I had driven to that dinner alone, in the same car with the same check engine light, with one letter in my bag and no idea what came next. But I had spent 11 years reading the truth out of rough drafts. I knew what something real sounded like. I said, "I'm grateful for what Grandpa built, and I'm grateful for what Ethan will bring to it. I have no interest in running the business. That's not my skill." I paused. "But Grandpa gave me a specific job. And I intend to do it. Every book that goes into this catalog, I will read. Every acquisition, I will evaluate. That's not power for power's sake. That's a promise I made to a man who built something worth protecting." The room was quiet. Ethan looked at me. For the first time in maybe a decade, he actually looked at me. He said, "I didn't know about the codicil." I said, "I know." He nodded. Once. Slowly. Then he turned to the room and said, "My sister will serve as editorial advisor. That's how our grandfather wanted it. That's how we'll run it." My father said nothing. His jaw worked. His eyes moved from me to Patricia to Arthur Gaines, who had appeared quietly near the back wall. And then he sat down. Not because he was defeated. Because he understood, for the first time, that he had never controlled the room the way he thought he did. Grandpa Douglas had built his plan into the foundation long before anyone knew there was a plan. The weeks that followed were not easy. My father did not speak to me for 17 days. My mother called 3 times. Each call started with Nadia, "Your father is very hurt," and ended before either of us could say anything real. Ethan and I had one long conversation on a Tuesday night in November. He drove to Nashville. We sat in my small apartment, the one with the thin walls and the neighbor's alarm clock, and talked for 4 hours. He said, "I always thought you didn't care about the company." I said, "I cared. I just knew they didn't want me there." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I should have said something." At those dinners. When Dad talked about you like that. I should have said something. That is the most anyone in my family has ever said to me. It wasn't enough to fix 20 years. But it was real. And real is where you start. 6 months later, I took my seat at the first acquisitions meeting. The conference table was the same one my grandfather had used for 40 years. Long, dark wood, slightly scarred on one corner from a coffee cup incident in 1998 that had become company legend. 12 people around the table. Editors, sales leads, board members. All of them watching me. Ethan sat at the head. He said, "Floor's yours, Nadia." I opened the first manuscript. A debut novel from a 34-year-old teacher in West Virginia who had been writing the same story for 9 years. Submitted to 43 publishers. Rejected by all of them. I had read it the week before. I had read it twice. I set it on the table. "This one," I said. Someone asked what it was about. I said, "It's about a woman who spends her whole life being told she doesn't see things clearly. And then one day she does. And it changes everything." The room was quiet. Then Patricia Hale, sitting 2 seats down, said, "Motion to acquire?" "Seconded," said the editor beside her. The vote was unanimous. That book went on to sell 140,000 copies in its first year. It won 2 awards. The author sent me a handwritten note that I framed and hung above my desk. It said, "Thank you for being the first person who believed what I was saying." I thought about my grandfather. I thought about finding a voice buried in a rough draft. I thought about truth sounding different from everything else. I thought about all the years I had spent believing I was the broken one, the scattered one, the one who couldn't focus, and how all of that time, what looked like inability was actually something else. Not a ceiling. A different kind of vision. My grandfather knew it before I did. He just needed me to find my way to the room where it mattered. I am still finding my way. Every week, every manuscript, every Tuesday afternoon when I clear my desk and start reading. The check engine light in my car finally got fixed. My apartment walls are still thin. I still eat a lot of rice. But every Tuesday morning, I walk into Callaway Press. Through the doors of a building my grandfather built from nothing. Past the framed covers of books that started as voices no one else was willing to find. To a chair at a long dark table. And I sit down. And I do my grandfather's job. And I do it the way he taught me to. Quietly. Carefully. With my whole heart. I didn't win anything. I didn't defeat my family. I didn't need to. My grandfather had already settled it. He just needed me to show up. And showing up, for the people who believe in us before we believe in ourselves, is the whole job. That's the only inheritance that lasts. If this story meant something to you, if someone once saw something in you that you couldn't see in yourself, I want to hear about it. Share this with someone who needs to be reminded that being different has never meant being less. Thank you for listening. Show up for your people. That's the whole job. Share content. My name is Iris Tmain and I just turned 18. At my birthday party last night, my dad pulled me aside and whispered, "When 0:088 seconds this is over, you're going to sign some papers for Uncle Wade. Just a formality." I smiled. I nodded. Then I 0:16 seconds walked into the kitchen, opened my laptop, pasted 0:00. My name is Dulce Witford. I'm 28 years old. For 20 years, my parents called me the slow one, while my sister Miranda 0:088 seconds collected Harvard degrees and inheritance promises. They mocked my dyslexia at dinner tables, excluded me 0:15 seconds from family decisions, and paid me a fracture pasted.